When Russia invaded Ukraine, its forces stormed into the key region of Donetsk to take a large amount of territory. Despite Ukrainian pushbacks, Russia has held the majority of that region for much of the war, and it is slowly but surely inching forward. Ukraine can't allow that, and it just did something that Russia never expected. Ukraine has turned its drones against its own occupied territory in a startling attack that plunged Russian occupiers into darkness. The power is being cut off in Donetsk as Ukraine delivers a message to Russia that it's willing to bring the battle over energy to its own turf. Euromaidan press reports that the first signs of a Ukrainian strike on Donetsk came during the early hours of November 18th, when several of the region's occupied cities experienced abrupt losses of power. It didn't take long to learn why. The outlet revealed that Ukraine launched a coordinated drone strike against its own region, targeting a pair of thermal power plants that Russia has occupied and is now using to provide electricity and heating to its troops and other occupiers. Those two plants were the Starobashivska and the Zuivska thermal power stations, and both are now on fire due to Ukraine's drones. Information is limited regarding what happened at the Starobashivska plant, but we have footage of what happened at Zuivska. Shared by the Escalation Plus Telegram channel, a 15-second video seemingly shot from a home or apartment building shows flames shooting into the sky from the direction of the plant. Another video, also shared by Escalation Plus, appears to show the Ukrainian drone strike in progress. Little is seen, though sound of the drones and Russian air defenses pepper the footage. Euromaidan press adds a little more information, claiming that reports following the Zuivska strike revealed that Ukraine managed to score a direct hit on the transformer serving the plant's second boiler. That transformer is now out of service, and the resulting blackouts in parts of Donetsk can be traced directly to this attack. Also on November 18th, RBC Ukraine published its own report on the Ukrainian strike, providing a few more details about the two thermal power plants in the process. It says the Zuivska plant is in the city of Zugrez and has a capacity of around 1,200 megawatts. That's enough to make the plant responsible for providing electricity to around a third of the occupied parts of Donetsk, which makes it clear why Ukraine targeted it. The Starobashivska plant is even larger, with a maximum capacity of 2,300 megawatts, and Russia has been using it to stabilize its energy systems in occupied Donetsk. Our repeated mentions of the word occupied are important here. On the surface, it looks like Ukraine has launched a drone assault against its own energy facilities, which seems counterproductive. However, these facilities have been out of Ukraine's control for a long time. Russia has been using them to support its soldiers in the contested regions of Donetsk for months or even years. Taking the plants out likely wasn't an easy choice for Ukraine to make, however, it is a logical one. These facilities can be rebuilt over time once Ukraine regains its territory. But in the here and now, they needed to be taken out to cause as much pain to the Russian occupiers as possible. It's worth noting at this point that Ukraine has yet to claim responsibility for this duo of Donetsk strikes, so the majority of the information that we have comes from reports on the ground, many of which have been compiled by Euromaidan press. The outlet claims that the initial power outages caused by these strikes occurred in the occupied city of Donetsk, though they quickly spread to the settlements of Makivka and Ilovaisk, which lost electricity completely. All three of these settlements began to lose power about 30 minutes after social media reports emerged of Ukrainian drones being spotted in the Donetsk sky. Lights were flickering following the Zuivska strike, Euromaidan press says, but the full blackouts began being reported only after the Starobashivska thermal plant was hit. That's practically all we know about the strikes themselves. We'll likely only learn more if Ukraine decides to publish a statement on the November 18th attacks. Interestingly, more information is coming from the Russian occupiers than from Ukraine. The Moscow Times reports that Denis Pushilin, who has been installed as the leader of the occupied portions of Donetsk by Russia, took to Telegram to announce the blackouts and explain more about which regions have been affected. Announcing that an emergency plan had been put in place to get power restored as quickly as possible, Pushilin revealed that Ukraine's drones were extremely effective. In an initial statement, the Putin-approved leader said, "An unprecedented attack on the Republic's power grid damaged the Zuivska and Starobashivska thermal power plants. Power was cut off to many populated areas, causing boiler houses and filtration stations to shut down." He followed that up with a second Telegram post providing more details about the meeting that had resulted from the agencies operating in emergency mode, along with details about just how badly occupied Donetsk was affected. At the moment, 65% of consumers are without electricity, the proxy mayor said, before adding, "Unfortunately, rolling power outages are possible." The rest of Pushilin's statement dealt with the meeting he planned to hold, but that's irrelevant at this point. To the Russian forces in occupied Donetsk, as well as those who remained in the region and may be sympathetic to Russia, these strikes should never have happened. Russia is supposed to be capable of protecting the Ukrainian territory that it occupies, On November 18th, Ukraine just proved that it's failing to do that, and it made Russia pay. Yet more information comes from another Russian source named DNR News. It provided some interesting numbers that go beyond the 65% of occupied Donetsk affected that Putin's proxy mayor reported. DNR says that both of the thermal power plants that Ukraine struck have been shut down completely, meaning they're not even operating partially to supply electricity to the region's residents. Those total shutdowns have affected 2,399 transformer substations, 44 educational institutions, 66 boiler houses, 14 medical facilities, and 376,110 customers who rely on the shutdown thermal plants to provide them with their electricity. By this point, it's obvious that Ukraine hit precisely what it intended to hit. Here, the obvious question that comes in the wake of this pair of drone strikes is why? As we mentioned earlier, both of the thermal power stations Ukraine just took out are actually Ukrainian, albeit occupied by Russia's forces. Ukraine has made the decision to sacrifice those stations for a reason. Ukraine is delivering a taste of Russia's own medicine back to it. Since the beginning of the fall, Russia has switched the focus of its aerial strikes from causing general devastation in Ukraine's cities to targeting the country's energy infrastructure. Putin's goal is simple: freeze Ukraine's people out. He wants to take out as much of Ukraine's electricity and heating infrastructure as possible to make the winter of 2025 a long, cold, and dark one for Ukraine's citizens. It's a terroristic approach to warfare that once again sees Russia targeting civilians instead of soldiers, and it's something that Russia has done every year since Putin launched his invasion. However, there's something different about 2025. As Putin tries to gain leverage in case he ever decides to engage in peace talks with the West again, Russia's aerial attacks on Ukraine's energy infrastructure have intensified beyond anything we've seen during the war. An example comes from one of Russia's most recent strikes, as reported by the Kyiv Independent on November 8th. The early hours of that morning saw Russia launch one of its largest aerial attacks against Ukraine's energy infrastructure to date, leaving parts of Kyiv in total darkness for around 12 hours. The scale of the strike can be determined by the number of drones Ukraine claims to have shot down. The Kyiv Independent says that Ukraine destroyed 406 of the 458 Shahed-type attack drones and decoys that Russia sent into the country. It was less successful when dealing with Russia's cruise and ballistic missiles. 45 of those missiles came hurtling into Ukraine during the early hours of November 8th, and only 9 of them were shot down. Ukraine's energy minister, Svetlana Hrinchuk, said that the strike may have been the largest that Russia has yet launched against Ukraine's energy infrastructure, dubbing the attack one of the largest direct ballistic missile attacks on energy facilities since the beginning of the war, she said. It's hard to remember such a number of ballistic missiles that directly attacked energy facilities. On the same day that Ukraine conducted its revenge strike on the Donetsk thermal plants, Kyiv Independent published an article in which it claimed that Russia has created a doom loop within Ukraine's energy system. That loop has 3 parts: destroy, fix, repeat. It said that as a €100 million, or about $116 million, corruption scandal erupts around Ukraine's energy sector, Russia is taking a systematic approach to taking out Ukraine's energy. It hits a target, allows Ukraine to fix that target, and then hits it again. The idea here is both to take out the power for as long as possible and to cost Ukraine valuable money in repairs before taking the infrastructure out again, and it seems to be working. At least on the financial side. The Kyiv Independent says that Ukraine has received about $1.16 billion of equipment via more than 30 donor countries as part of the Energy Community Fund that is supporting Ukraine's energy infrastructure. However, DTEK, which is one of Ukraine's major energy providers, has already burned through $166 million repairing its coal and thermal facilities in 2025 alone, and hundreds of millions more have likely been spent by Ukraine's other energy providers, according to the Kyiv Independent. DTEK's owner, Rinat Akhmetov, suggests that the scale and repetitious nature of Russia's energy strikes are starting to cause major issues. The problem is time and money. I tried to be optimistic. Maybe another country will modernize its energy facilities next year and give us its old equipment, Akhmetov tells the Kyiv Independent. This statement reveals another issue that goes underreported. Much of Ukraine's energy infrastructure dates back to the Soviet era, meaning that Soviet parts are needed to conduct repairs. That's why Akhmetov is waiting for countries that may have once been part of the Soviet Union to modernize. Ukraine needs that to happen so that it can essentially scavenge older parts that will keep its facilities running. And the more that Russia locks into the doom cycle of energy infrastructure attacks, the more limited the supplies of these Soviet-era parts become. Russia's approach has also become more cynical in 2025. During the first half of 2025, Russia honed in on Ukraine's energy sector, hitting it hard. The Energy Community Secretariat says that over half of Ukraine's pre-war generation capacity has been taken offline during these 6 months alone, including 70% of the thermal power plants that supply electricity to Ukraine's people. The Kyiv Independent adds that Russia has turned its attention to Ukraine's domestic gas production in 2025, having previously done little to hit that sector during the war. About 60% of Ukraine's gas production was wiped out in attacks on October 3rd and October 5th alone, demonstrating that the energy situation in Ukraine is becoming increasingly dire. All of this brings us back to the reason we mentioned for Ukraine's November 18th strikes. Russia is in severe need of a dose of its own medicine that tries to shut down Ukraine's energy sector, and Ukraine has been trying to deliver an overdose of that medicine in response to what Russia is doing. On November 17th, Novaya Gazeta revealed that Ukraine's own attacks on Russia's energy infrastructure are proving very effective. Ukraine has been scaling up alongside Russia, and its long-range drones have forced power outages to rise by a third in 2025. Specifically, Russia has experienced 34% more power outages so far in 2025 than it did during all of 2024. And the odds are that this percentage will rise as Ukraine launches more revenge strikes during the last month and a half of the year. The outlet also provides deeper insight, stating, from January to October 2025, 4,198 power outages were reported in Russia, a 12% increase on the 3,749 recorded during the whole of 2024, most of which were isolated cases. As you might expect, Russia doesn't tend to admit when Ukraine's drones have scored direct hits. It claims that 15% of the blackouts have been caused by extreme weather, with another 17% happening due to scheduled maintenance. To be fair, up to 11% of the outages have been attributed to drone strikes and shelling, as the outlet reports. However, it's the 41% that have occurred as a result of infrastructure damage and emergency repairs, and the 16% that result from other or unknown causes that deserve the most attention. Russia doesn't want to specify what's happening, but that doesn't mean we don't already know. Ukraine has been getting revenge for Russia's energy infrastructure strikes with similar strikes of its own, and Russia is starting to feel the very pain that Putin wants to inflict on Ukraine. November 18th simply provided two more examples of a Ukrainian campaign that has been ongoing since the beginning of 2025, with the added twist that Ukraine took out two of its own thermal power plants in a region of Donetsk that Russia occupies. And there's a reason for that beyond plunging the Russians in the region into darkness. An occupied Donetsk without energy is an occupied Donetsk from which Russia will struggle to launch assaults elsewhere in the region. Donetsk is already heading toward its coldest period of the year, as the Moscow Times said in its report on Ukraine's thermal plant strikes. The city of Donetsk, which is one of the settlements affected by the power outages that Ukraine caused, was forecast to have temperatures of just 46 degrees Fahrenheit on November 18th, and will likely hit a low of 44 degrees Fahrenheit on November 19th. These aren't freezing cold temperatures, however, they are far from comfortable for an occupying Russian army that thought it was safe from Ukrainian attacks on energy infrastructure because that infrastructure was located on Ukrainian territory. RBC Ukraine adds that the wider purpose of Ukraine's energy infrastructure strikes, which are occurring alongside an increase in attacks on Russian oil refineries, is to make Russia's forces on the ground far less effective. Fuel availability and logistics inside Russia and the occupied territories are already being impacted by these types of strikes, so the loss of power while all of this is happening can't come at a worse time for Russia's forces. As Putin attempts to arrange a final fall push deeper into Donetsk before freezing cold temperatures engulf the region, his commanders are literally trying to launch those attacks in cold and dark conditions. That isn't good for Russia's prospects of success. Of course, Putin won't do anything as sensible as delaying Russia's assaults because power is being cut off by Ukraine. The assaults will still happen, with Russia's disorganized troops being picked off by Ukraine. Putin, that at least means his soldiers will soak up some Ukrainian ammunition, which is better than nothing. Ukraine will also be happy about any attacks that might slow down or weaken Russia's assaults. As The Independent pointed out in October, Russia currently controls about 75% of Donetsk and has been making marginal gains in the region throughout the year. Putin wants to control Donetsk fully, partially because that's been one of his goals since Russia launched its initial campaign of aggression against Ukraine in 2014, and partially because total control would give Putin leverage in peace talks. If Russia controls Donetsk, Putin can argue that the region should be handed over as part of a peace settlement. Ukraine can't let that happen. And its attacks on its own energy infrastructure in occupied Donetsk are part of a strategy to prevent full Russian control. Russia is also pushing to take the key city of Pokrovsk, which is Ukraine's most important logistical hub in Donetsk and has been under Russian assault for about 18 months. Pokrovsk push has already inflicted heavy casualties on Russia as Putin attempts to take the territory at the cost of over 100,000 of his soldiers. You can learn more about the scale of Russia's losses in our video. Ukraine will be hoping that targeting energy infrastructure in occupied Donetsk will also weaken Russia's assaults on Pokrovsk, perhaps leading to more Russian losses and the city remaining in Ukrainian control, at least until the end of 2025. But ultimately, Ukraine's double strike in Donetsk shows us that it's realized that the best way to combat Russia's energy strikes is to conduct similar strikes of its own. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky said as much back on October 9th, following yet another Russian attack on Ukraine's energy infrastructure. Back then, Ukraine's president warned that the Russian border region of Belgorod would be on his agenda if Russia didn't cease its infrastructure strikes. "We have not changed our position. One of the most intensive directions from which Ukraine is being hit is the Belgorod direction," UNM reports Zelensky is saying. "We told them that they should understand that if they want to cause blackouts for us, we will do the same. There are no secrets here. The enemy must feel the price of this war, but we do not kill civilians. Our troops only launch pinpoint strikes exactly where the task is set." Perhaps Ukraine has expanded its scope to Donetsk, as proven by its latest strikes. If so, it's a logical decision. Russia uses the territories it's occupied to launch drones and glide bombs into the rest of Ukraine, so it's likely the parts of Donetsk that Ukraine just plunged into darkness are also parts from which Russian drones and missiles have come in the past. Maybe those aerial strikes will be impacted as much as Russia's ground strategy in Donetsk, now that 2 of the region's thermal power plants have been taken out. One thing is for sure, Ukraine just showed Putin that it's willing to hit itself where it hurts if it means inflicting even greater pain on the Russian occupiers. Strangely enough, Putin is also hitting Russia where it hurts, though his callous attacks affect his own army rather than Ukraine. In Pokrovsk, Putin has been abandoning his troops to die, leaving Russia's injured soldiers to fend for themselves while killing anybody who refuses to follow Putin's insane orders. Find out more, along with a story from one of Russia's abandoned soldiers, in our video. And if you enjoyed this video, remember to subscribe to The Military Show for more updates about developments in the Donetsk region. And thank you as always for watching.